Bible study, Exodus study, all of the above. I want to give a special shout out to our pastor and assistant pastor at home, and everybody who's at home with the crud. Get well, and we look forward to seeing you soon. We're in Exodus chapter 21 tonight. Exodus 21. And I wish, it was one of those passages that I get all fiery about. The ones that give you the good feelings and you're like, oh man, this Bible study thing is amazing. And I just hate to tell you, this is not one of those chapters. But what I do believe is this, if we're going to do a book-long study, we have to do a book-long study. And there are some gems buried in this chapter that I do want us to dissect tonight, to look at, and be able to tie to other parts of the Bible. So I'm going to give you that disclaimer, go ahead and let you know that tonight is not one of those stories. As a matter of fact, it's not much of a story at all. It's a whole bunch of rules. And so we're going to dig and dive today in Exodus chapter 21. I have open in my iPad on one side the King James Version, and on the other side the NIV version, and we're gonna read that way. Now, just a little bit of background in today's chapter. In the law profession, especially when you go to court, the way that they decide whether something is legal or not is based on case law. And so they have all of these precedents. A precedent are instances that happened before and how they were dealt with in the past. And so if you were to go to court, if somebody sued you or if you committed a crime, the judge is going to go through the books and look at what we call case law, and they're going to judge your case based on what's happened in the past. So today, in chapter 21, 22, and 23, God has provided for the children of Israel case law. Now, y'all remember a couple of chapters ago, Moses' father-in-law Jethro said, you need to go get some judges because they're going to kill you. And they're going to take you out of here, and you need somebody to back you up. Well, you can't have people that back you up if they don't know how to think like you. They don't know how you would judge some situations. They don't know what would be right and what would be wrong. And so for the next few chapters, what we have are instances, if this happens, then this is what you should do. And while a lot of it's boring, I'm going to just tell you the truth, there are some wonderful gems buried, and I think the first gem is in the first instance we see here. Chapter 21 reads this way, King James Version. It says, now these are the judgments which thou hast set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master have given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be the master's, and he shall go out by himself. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring unto him judges, and he shall bring him to the door and unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an anvil, and he shall serve him forever. That's a whole lot of people who think that the Bible is responsible for slavery. There's a whole school of thought. There's a whole bunch of people who don't believe in Christianity because they think slavery is the Bible's fault. But what I want you to see here is that slavery existed before the Bible ever made a covenant. And so God here is dealing with the fact that slavery exists. And since slavery exists, God said, let's put some ramifications on this thing because y'all just came out of slavery and you didn't enjoy it. And since you didn't enjoy it because it is an evil that is in the world, we're going to put some lines on this thing. So but the first thing what I want you to see is that he says to them, you can't be a slave forever. Don't keep these people bound to you forever. There's nothing that they could do that's going to bind them to you forever. So he says, if you're going to have a slave, the first thing you can do is that they only can serve you for 6 years. He put some ramifications on it. He said 6 years. And then on the 7th year, you got to let them go. You got to let them go. Can I bring that back to today? Because we don't have slaves, but at some point, you got to let it go. They did this, they owed you some money, they did, whatever it is, and you've been holding it. And so I want to give you some understanding that there's a period of time sometimes you can hold some stuff. They borrowed the money from me. I'm going to expect them to pay it back. But after a while, I've got to let go the expectation that they're going to pay it back, whether they do or they don't. And so, but he says, if you buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years, they can be a slave. On the 7th year, you got to let them go. Because God himself doesn't hold us guiltless that long. Well, if we're washed in the blood, but we're going to see about that in a second. Then he says, if he came in by himself, let him go by himself. If he's married, let him go with his wife. Let him, if he came in with it, let him go free. Don't take anything from him. Don't steal from him. Don't regard yourself. Don't take anything from him. But if you gave him a wife, you can keep the wife. If he has children with that wife, you can keep that person. And that seems kind of wrong, but I want you to see what happens next. In verse 5, he says, but if the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife and my children, I will not go free, then his master can bring him to the judges and bring him to the door and the doorpost, and upon the doorpost he shall make a bore through his ear with an awl. Now, that's weird to me, because if I'm a slave, why would I want to stay in slavery? If I'm bound to somebody, I don't have my freedom, I can't run free, why would I want to stay in that situation? Most of us don't want to stay on a job. We see the opportunity to get out, to get retired, to find some other way to make money. We run for the hills. So why would I want to stay bound? But I want us to think, it's not about the slave. It's about the slave master. Because it means that the slave master is so kind, is so good, has provided a better life for him than he has ever provided for himself, that I like this life. Now, that sounds so terrible, but let's go to the New Testament. Paul writes to Titus, and when he's writing to Titus in Titus 1 verse 4, he says, I, Paul, a slave of Christ. He says, I, Paul, a bondservant of Christ. That's what we're talking about here. He writes, he says, I've made a decision that I provide for myself in my own life any better than what God can. And so I'm just like a man who decided to stay enslaved because this life that God has given me is better than what I can provide. Now, I want us to see this because not only does Paul become a bondservant, not only can a slave become a bondservant, not only are we expected to be bondservants of Christ, but there are some other parallels here. Now, it says that he's to go before the judges, and they're supposed to put his ear on a door and slam a hole through it. Now, that's boring. Like, I accidentally cut myself the other night, and it was on accident. Like, I'm not one of those people who inflicts pain on purpose. I run from pain, not a fan of it at all. But he voluntarily wants to put his ear on the doorpost as a sign of pride. Now, that seems really weird until we realize that it's alluding to Jesus Christ. Now, we know in Isaiah it alludes to Jesus being pierced in the side. And we know on Golgotha's hill he is pierced literally in his side. And so we believe that this illusion of the slave choosing to belong to the master forever is a direct allusion to Jesus Christ and the nails that hung him on the cross, because it was a decision. It was a choice. And so although in case law there is this option, I don't find it an accident that it opens our case law with the option to be a servant in a society that's against servitude. In a society that says servants are the lowest and the downcast. In a society that says that servants are nothing. It gives them the option to choose. And so I want you to think this evening. I want you to think for a second. When was the last time I chose to take the lesser road? When was the last time I chose to be the servant. You know, it's easy to be like, let me get that door for you. Especially in the South, because we all got manners, supposed to at least. You know, it's easy to do that, but when was the last time that I said, I'm going to go out of my way, make myself uncomfortable so that you can be, you insert the blank. Because here we see this beautiful analogy that the master was so good. And I want you to think to yourself, is God that good for you? Has he been that kind to you? Has he been that faithful to you? Would you judge his love to be that great that you would say, I can't make decisions for myself? It's a brand new year, y'all. And most of us have made resolutions that we want to get closer to God. I feel like that's the Christian's number one resolution. What's your resolution this year? I want to get closer to God. I'm going to pray more, read my Bible. Every Christian, we start the year out, and for like the first 5 days, we pray every morning. And on day 6, we be like, you know, that was a lot of work. But let me ask you this. If I have the option to let God make the choice, and I know that God is going to make the best choice every time, do I trust him? But see, I think sometimes in our Christian walk, we think that God is not going to make the best choice because I've been living with me my whole life. I know how I think. I know how this earth has treated me. And so surely God is too far away to make the best decisions for me. And I know Minister Cole stood up there Sunday and told us about if God was doing it for one, he could do it for another, but that's just not been my experience. And I want you to see this. We reason ourselves out of submission to God. And as we reason ourselves out of submission to God, y'all know what happens? We start missing the will of God. We reason ourselves out of submission, and all of a sudden, I have excuses for not being obedient. I have excuses for not serving. I have excuses. And so when I don't get blessed, I'm still blaming God, but I didn't submit to God. Okay. Let's keep moving because we do have a lot of these tonight. There were 4 basic reasons that a Hebrew could be enslaved. He could be in extreme poverty, so he couldn't afford to pay his bills. He could sell his daughter, and we're going to talk about that in a second. He could be a slave for the case of bankruptcy, or if he was a thief. And you're going to see for a second they don't deal too kindly with thieves. So here we go. Verse 7. If a man sells his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as men servants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed, and sell her to a strange nation. He shall have no power, seeing he have dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. And if he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall not be diminished. And if he do not these 3 unto her, then shall she go out free without money. I went to go see a comic this weekend, a really good show. He opened his show and he made this statement. He said, males, young boys, are vulnerable till they're about 11, 12, 13 years old. And then after they hit puberty, they're not really vulnerable in society anymore. But our girls are vulnerable from the time they're born until they die. And we, in our black culture, have taught our girls to be strong, and we have protected and coddled our boys. Here in this second bit of case law, God is upholding that truth that that young man said. He said that our women are vulnerable. They are vulnerable from the time they come into this world to the time they leave. And although the society of the time of this writing does not make them equal, that does not mean that they are to go without protection. Now, I want you to think about this, because every time we read our Bibles, we put context. We're like, the women didn't have this, and they didn't have that. They didn't have this. But when God gave them case law, he said, you protect the girls at all costs. And so I want you to think about that when you're reading your Bible, because truthfully, just because the people of the Bible didn't have the heart of God didn't mean that the women didn't have God's heart. God saw them from the beginning. Because what he says, you can sell your daughter because you can't afford to pay your debt and make her to be a dowry. So if he doesn't have any money, you can give your daughter away and make the debt even. But he's got to uphold some things for your daughter. Now, let's think about this contextually. If you got a guy who, I don't have any money, I got a daughter, they're going to come take my house, or they're going to make me a slave, I can give the guy my daughter to marry. But I love my daughter. But my daughter is innocent, and she loves me, and it's my job to protect her. God told me that this was my child to protect. I would be eerie about giving her to a guy that I'm not sure I trust. So God said, I'm going to put some physical laws in place so that you know that your daughter will be okay no matter what happens. And since I put some physical laws in place, here's what they are. So first thing you got to see is that she's got, you sell her, she's not to go out as the men servants do. And if he doesn't like her, and if he doesn't like her, he can't sell her to a strange nation. She cannot go out into a strange nation. She's got to stay in the nation by which she came into the earth. Okay, so she's got to stay a Hebrew. Not only of that, if she's betrothed to a son, she can't. I'm sorry. If he doesn't take her as a wife, or he takes another wife, he can't take away her food. He can't stop dressing her. He's got to make sure she's kept and well kept. Why? Because she came from a place of protection, not to go into a place of vulnerability. Because remember, it is the man's job to cover the woman as he submits to God, right? So if I pass my daughter from one house to another household, I want to be protected to know that I'm not putting her in a house that don't have a roof. Okay. Now let me put this. Let me break this down, because I know that my folks at home, my young folks who don't think that you got to ask your daddy whether you should get married or not. This is why. Because if God puts you in the household and the covering of some parents who want your best, they got to go scope out to see where you're going to make sure that it's at least the same. You know, you may not be going up, but they don't want you to go down. Okay, and so even God himself says we got to protect our girls. And so I'm going to put some laws in place so that you can't come out here and just treat these women any other way. Why? The Canaanites, the Hivites, the Perizzites were exploiting their women. They were selling their women, and the women were out in the street. They'd have to turn to these good virgin girls would be thrown out on the street, and they'd become prostitutes. They'd become women of the night, and they didn't want to, okay? But they came from a house, but daddy couldn't afford to keep me. And so now I'm in a house that don't have a covering because they've been exploited, okay? And so the truth is that a covering is necessary. Now let's go a little bit deeper. Covering is necessary for our girls. Covering is necessary for our households. Covering is necessary for your spirit, okay? And so I know, and I'm talking more to the people in our broadcast space than in the room. I know that it's not popular for you to have to join a church. It's a lot of people against church joining, and so we watch online, and I'm grateful that you watch. But I want to tell you something, that when you're watching online and you don't submit to a covering, you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to some of the same stuff. You may not be vulnerable to somebody putting you out on the street and making you a prostitute, but you're vulnerable to spiritual attacks. If there's not a God-appointed leader in your life who's praying for you, who's speaking into your life, and not just speaking a sermon, but sometimes you need somebody who calls you and says, now wait. Let me submit this to you because you look like you're about to fall off a cliff. And I know you think that this is good, but we got to pause because this isn't safe. You need somebody who's going to tell you in ways that are not comfortable that this is not the way we want to go. And I can save you 10 years. And so God has this heart. He wants to protect our women. He protects the ladies. Let's move on to the next one, verse 12. He said, he that smiteth a man so that he die should be surely put to death. And if the man lay not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then I will appoint thee a place whither you shall flee. So you got in a fight. Y'all was arguing over the parking slot. And you knew it was your spot. You had circled for it. You've been in the parking lot for 30 minutes. And then this person in this nice red Corvette swings into the parking spot. And you've been on one. Your kids were acting up this morning. You got into it with your husband on the way out of the house. And they just hit you on the wrong nerve. So y'all started fighting, okay? And you started fighting, and y'all was going toe to toe, and those words turned into blows. God got case law for that too. So he says to the Hebrew people, he says, now if you start fighting and the person dies, you gotta die. In other words, you gotta handle your anger. You can't let it get there. But if y'all were fighting and you didn't mean to kill him, maybe you weren't fighting. Maybe you were out minding your business and you accidentally backed into them and they died. He says, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna provide for you a place to run. Now let me give you some background. In every family, there was a person called the Avenger of Blood. It was that crazy cousin who, if somebody in your family died, it was their job to go kill the other person that killed them. It was normal in the Hebrew culture. It was normal in Canaanite culture. It was normal. So the Avenger of Blood's job was to make sure that their family name didn't have blood on it. Okay? Because we learn, not only in Genesis, but in the other passages, that if there was blood on the ground from your family, the family was now cursed. And the only way to get rid of that curse was to avenge the blood. And so and I know we thank God for the laws we have, that this is not what we live up under. But so if there's an avenger of blood, God says, if it's an accident, I see your heart. I care about your heart. And since I care about your heart, I'm going to give for you sanctuary cities. And so as they move into Jerusalem, there actually becomes 7 sanctuary cities, or maybe it's 8. Some of them on one side of the Jordan and others on the other side of the Jordan. And if you go to the sanctuary city, you cannot be killed on the altar there, okay? And so it kind of reads, so he says, I will point thee a place where you can flee, these sanctuary cities. But I want you to notice this. Before I move any further, let me slow down. God cares about your intentions. God cares about your intentions. Now, I grew up, my mama used to say all the time that the pathway to hell was paved with good intentions. And she would say that because I was like, well, I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to. And the truth is that God looks at your heart, but he does measure your actions. And so when something happens, he's not saying that the person who was accidentally hurt somebody versus the person who went and got up out of their bed and said, I'm going to go kill them today. He's not saying that they are the same or that they're equal. And so he says, I'm going to appoint for you sanctuary cities. But we're going to see in a second, he puts even rules on the sanctuary cities. All right. Then he says, verse 14, but if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor to slay him with guile, thou shalt take him from the altar, my altar, that he may die, and that he may smiteth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. He says, now look, verse 14, if you wake up in the morning, you decide to go kill somebody, and you run to that sanctuary city, I'm telling them they can come on my altar, pull you off my altar because you done defiled my altar, and they can deal with you the way that you need to be dealt with. In other words, you can't fool God. You cannot fool God, and you can't fool people who pray to God. Okay? Now let's think about these. These are rules that he's giving these judges. Remember, these judges had to be equipped. These judges had to be God-fearing. These judges had to be right standing with God. So these are not just judges on the bench like downtown. These are judges who pray. These are judges who have sought the face of God. And so he says, you can't make up in your mind that you're going to get out of something and you're going to usurp the justice of God. So that's a lot of these little rules. So then he says, verse 15, he says, but he that smites his mother or his father shall be surely put to death. So basically, if you decide you're going to wake up one morning, y'all know how you see on the news, a kid wakes up one morning, he decides he's going to kill his mom and his daddy. God, and then we ask the question in our society, are we going to are we going to try them as a child, or we're going to try them as an adult? God said, you're going to get tried as an adult. I don't care how old you are. You're going to get tried as a grown person. And so you're going to have to die today. But you go back and you remember, we just came out of the 10 Commandments. The 5th one was what? Honor your mother and your father so your what? Your days may be longer. So while that is a commandment with promise, I want us to also be aware that God is like, but you're not going to disrespect them either. You know, you may not want the upgrade, but you're going to get a downgrade if you decide that you're going to take some things into your own hands and your own opinions. All right, so let's keep moving. I don't like a thief. Verse 16, he says, and he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall be surely put to death. Now, y'all remember I said something earlier about slavery and people thinking that slavery came from the Bible? Sounds like God don't like slavery. Because he said if you steal a man and you sell that man or you be found in his hand, you got to be put to death. So that sounds like to me the slave trade, all of them should have been put to death if they were up under this Hebrew law. It also sounds like to me that all the human trafficking, that God is not okay with that either. And he put such a heavy standard bearer, like this is not jail time. This is not a fine or probation. This is, you do the crime, you got to go. But I want you to think about what he's doing. Y'all know in Matthew 13, we get those 7 parables. One of the parables is the wheat and the tares, and how the tares at the appointed time will be removed from the vineyard so that they can be burned. God realizes that if you allow something to fester among his people long enough, that it'll corrupt everything. That everything will be corrupted. And so he says, if I got a kidnapper or a human trafficker living among my people, all of a sudden my people may start to think that's okay. If I've got a person who thinks that they can just kill their parents because they got an attitude, and I let that go, they'll think that that's just okay. If I've got somebody living in these situations and I'm light on them, I don't think that's okay. Now, the second thing I want us to notice before we go a little bit further is not only does God think that way, but God also says this. He says, I've got get y'all to understand what sin cost. And so while in man's eye, oh, it's not that bad. I'm just, doing this. I just took them that one time. They made me mad, and I was just, getting that off my chest. He said, y'all don't understand that sin has a cost. When I made earth, I made it in perfection. It's been corrupted. And every time y'all do something, it's putting something on the ledger. And so he's breaking it down. He said, kidnapping, that costs death. Killing your killing your parents, that costs death. And so we're going to keep it. We're going to go see some more. Then let's see, verse 17. He says, if you curse your mother and your father, that costs death. Now, I want to break this down because curse is not like, the 4-letter words we use now, or y'all use. I don't use those words. But the word curse here is more like a threat. You threaten your parent. I'm going to throw you in a cave. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to, do this to you. Go to, those things. That's a curse. A curse is not, the profanities that we shouldn't use that are just crude. A curse says that I'm saying that I'm going to do something or I'm hoping something terrible happens to you. So he that curses his mother and his father shall be put to death. Verse 18. And if men strive together, and one smite another with the stone or with his fist, and he die not, but keepeth his bed, if he rise again and walk abroad on his staff, then he shall smote him, be quit, only be he shall pay for the loss of time and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. Now that sounds like a whole bunch of gibberish, right? In other words, if y'all got to a fight, we're still back on the fight thing, and he's still dealing with that. He says, if you hurt the person to where they can't work anymore, if you take away from him his ability to provide for his family, it's upon you to pay for that. So you got to pay for him to not only lay in the bed and his medical bills, but you got to pay for him to take care of his wife and his kids. Can y'all imagine how many assaults wouldn't happen if I knew that if I did something to you and you were permanently damaged, that I got to pay you the equivalent of alimony or child support every month? I got to pay your mortgage and my mortgage, your car note and my car note, your insurance and my insurance. But it says, if he rises again, he walks aboard his staff, then he shall he be smote him to be quit. Only he shall pay for the loss of time and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. So basically, but if y'all get into a fight and he only hurt for a couple of days, just pay for him to be okay and be all right. All right, 21. Notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall be not punished, for he is his money. Wait a minute, I skipped something. Verse 20, I'm sorry. And if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall be surely punished. All right. So we've been dealing with slavery, remember? So he says, if you have a servant and you hit the servant and that servant dies, you're held responsible. Now, in other cultures, including ours, a slave being hurt under your hands is a cost of the game. You go back to what, 200 years ago, and if the master killed a slave, the master killed a slave. But what God is saying is servants have value to me too. The lowest, the least, the last have value to me too. And so you can't think that you own them, although they're serving you for this period. Now, I want to talk, and I'm going to be very, very clear. We don't have this problem at Nineveh at all. But there are a lot of churches, and I know I have a lot of friends who watch who've been church hurt. It is the job of the leader to value the servant just as much as the servant values the leader. And there's an awful trend where we see leaders abusing young servants in churches and in job positions. And as they abuse them, it begins to breed this level of contempt. And I want to make this very clear. God cares about everybody under his care. And so that doesn't mean that just because Pastor so-and-so let you be close to him that you should be doing things that are ungodly. Because God says, if a man abuse his servant, he's to be punished. I'm going to say it again for those who are messy. We don't have this problem at Nineveh. We don't have this problem at Nineveh. But it is a problem in the body of Christ. And I want to be very clear in this teaching that if you're in a place where you feel like you're being abused or you're being tossed up, get out. Get out. God is not co-signing abuse. God is not co-signing you to stay in a place for people to manipulate you. That's not God. And people will tell you, well, it's the will of God. Submit to your leadership. If the leader isn't submitted to God, you do not have to submit to that leadership. Okay? Here we go. 21. Notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. And if in that case, if you got a slave and the slave is only hurt for a couple of days, he can't pay you anything because that's why he's your slave. 22. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall be surely punished, according to the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. So essentially, if you were riding a horse back in that day, and you ran into a woman who was pregnant, and she lost the baby. You owed the family something, because they just lost. They had a grave loss. And so they would go before the judges, and it was the judge's job to determine how much did this person owe the family. And it was according to what the husband said. The husband said, you know, we can't replace this child. We've been trying for this child a while. This is what this child was going to be. This was, you know, because of course they didn't have ultrasound. They didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. They didn't have, you know, a way to know how long they had been pregnant. But if the child was to die in the mom's womb and it was someone's fault, they would go to the judges, and the judges would determine how much. Now, if any mischief should follow, then thou shalt give life for life. So if something happened to the mom, too, you would give life for life, so you would have to die. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, burning for a burning, wound for a wound, stripe for a stripe. All that means is, if you can do the deed, you better be able to receive it. If you can throw this punch, you better be able to take one. If you can throw the joke, you better be able to receive it. And all this is doing is creating in people's minds a value system of what they do. Because a lot of times we are able to dish it, but we can't take it. And if we can dish it and we can't take it, you know, we create chaos in society, and all of a sudden that's how we have issues like, oh, he took my parking spot, well, I shot him. You know, well, they were flirting with my girlfriend, and now the mother of 3 children is dead. So he's creating a value system for life. And I want us to understand that God holds the total rights on life. He gave it, he takes it, and he's saying that we don't have the right to take life. You know, we may have the means to, but we don't have the right to. Now, verse 26. And if a man smite the eye of the servant or the eye of his maid, that it perish, he shall let him go free for the eye's sake. And if he smite out a manservant's tooth or a maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go for the tooth's sake. If an ox gore a man or a woman, that they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner's ox shall be quit. That's kind of a weird text. All that means is if an ox comes and it attacks a person, and the person dies, that the ox has to die, and that the owner of the ox is good as long as they're willing to give their animal. And of course, in an agrarian society, that kind of makes sense. It don't make sense to us these days. Well, I guess it kind of does. If your puppy dog decided to chase somebody down and kill them, puppy dog got to go. But if the ox were to push with his horn in the time past, and it has been testified of his owner that he did not keep him in, but that he killed a man or a woman, that the ox should be stoned, and that the owner shall be put to death. So this is more like you didn't know your dog had the capacity to kill somebody the first time. The second time, people knew that your dog was vicious. He gets out every day and he torments the children, and you didn't do anything about it. So now, because you didn't do anything about it and somebody has lost life, not only does the animal have to go, now you got to go because you didn't do anything about it. Can we put this even in further context? This is again showing us how much God values life. It is like somebody comes to your house, they slip and they fall. And as they slip and they fail, you didn't do anything to fix the area where they slip and they fell. So now somebody else has come to your house and they slip and they fell in the same spot. Okay? And so what the text is telling us is if the first time, okay, shame on them. The second time, it is shame on you, and you are now responsible for the cost of what happened. All right. Almost done. Verse 30. And if it be laid on him a sum of money, then he shall give him for him a ransom of his life, whatsoever is laid upon him. And whether he have gored a son, he have gored a daughter, according to his judgment shall it be done unto him. And if the ox shall push a manservant or a maidservant, he shall give unto their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. And if a man shall open a pit, let me pause there. If he pushed a servant, and the servant, he shall give unto their master 30 shekels of silver. In other words, they're putting a valuation on the servitude. And so the cost of a servant is 30 shekels. How much was Judas given for Jesus? Does anybody know? Does anybody know? 30 shekels of silver. Now, we began tonight talking about being a bondservant, and how Paul was a bondservant of Christ, and how Christ himself was pierced the same way that the bondservant is pierced. And so here we see them giving this whole rundown about this ox and the price of a manservant or servant. I want you to see this, that the price of Jesus in the eyes of those who wanted him dead was only the cost of a servant. I want us to, and we got a few more verses to read, but I really want us to sit here for a second. It is really easy to put a high valuation on ourselves and how important we think we are. And, you know, I got this degree, and I went here, and do you know who I am? But the valuation on the servant and on Christ was the same. And if we think of ourselves as anything more than a servant, we're getting it wrong. Well, we're walking in the wrong, we got the wrong idea. Because our servitude, we're no better than we are a servant. Let's keep moving. Verse 33, and if a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit, or not cover it, and an ox and ass fall in them, the owner of the pit shall make it good, and give money unto the owner of them, the dead beast shall be his. So the man, basically, if a man digs a well, and he doesn't secure the well, he doesn't put a cover on it, and some falls into it, he's got to make sure that he pays for that. How can I make that plain? Everybody knows I'm building a pool. If I got water in my pool, and I don't cover my pool, and somebody's child or their dog falls in that pool and drowns, it's my job to make it right, okay? Same situation. Verse 34. The owner of the pit shall make it good, and give money unto the owner to them, and the dead beast shall be his. And if one man's ox hurt another, that he die, and that they shall sell the live ox, and divide the money of it, and the dead ox also they shall divide. And if it be known that the ox used to push in time past, his owner hath not kept him, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead shall be his own. So I know that verse 20, chapter 21, 22, and 23 are not the most interesting chapters in the book of Exodus. But what I want you to see is that even in the boring stuff, that there are messages and that it's an encrypted code language to help us better understand the gospel. And so as you study at home, my encouragement to you is don't skip the lists. There's something in the list. There are things in the rules and the stuff that we don't really have to abide by today. Because even today we learned, about Christ on just about every one. Don't skip the stuff that seems boring, because usually that's where the greatest revelation is. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your goodness, your mercy, your grace. We thank you for your power. We thank you that you are from everlasting to everlasting. And so, God, this evening, we pray that you would not only be a redeemer of our time, but a redeemer of our souls. And so, God, I pray that you would continue to perfect the work that you have begun in us, God. I pray that you would give us insight and witty inventions, God. I pray that you would make us effective and efficient in this new year. God, we trust you, we believe you, and we thank you for all that you are, all that you do, and all that you are creating and perfecting in us. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen. Well, good people, we'll see you next week at 7 o'clock. Y'all be blessed.